Halli Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, where along with my partner in politics, veteran White House correspondent, and Time and Newsweek alum Matthew Cooper, we slice and dice all things politics, and some days, our lawmakers too. On this week's episode of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show podcast, Liz Cheney as an American heroine, and the untold story of the daring resistance efforts of the heroic Jewish women in the Polish ghettos of the Nazi occupation, as told in the new book, The Light of Days. Yes, women as heroines take center stage when joining me, along with Matt, is author Judy Batalion. There's more. As always, hang on to your hats. We begin with our weekly politics review. Here we go. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Halli.
Here we are, Matthew.
Here we are.
Another week and a whole lot more Republican crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trump opposition leader. How do you like that for a title for her? I think that works. Liz Cheney, in exactly 16 minutes, is ousted from her leadership position in a voice vote because the insurrectionists don't have the courage to do it on the record, so to speak, truly. Talk to me about this. And where does this leave things moving forward? It's mind-boggling. All of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, they have purged one of their leaders because she wouldn't bend the knee to Donald Trump, and because she told the truth about the election, and she wouldn't stop telling the truth about the election. I think she could have survived if she just stopped talking about it, but she didn't want to stop talking about it, and good for her. So they, she aroused the ire of her higher-ups, the Republican leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy, and the whip, Steve Scalise, and most of the Republican conference. They just, didn't want to hear it, thought she was distracting, thought it would make the orange one mad, and for lots and lots of reasons, they just turned on her with a couple of notable exceptions. And so she, her fate was sealed. And I think she seems pretty comfortable with that.
This was so ugly, like seriously, and so craven. Oh my God! But the thing is this: Senate Republicans were even quiet after all of this happened, give or take a couple. Actually, did anybody really make a to-do about this? And I put this in this context. Okay, consider this. This is the political reality of the Republican Party right now. They don't control the White House, the Senate, or the House. They've lost the popular vote in 7 out of the last 8 presidential races. They face their largest deficit on the party identification question in almost a decade. And yet, this is what they're doing. The man who brought them to this, you'll have to explain this to me, because it's nonsensical. And if you say the word to me, primary, I'm going to scream, because that's all that it is a primary. Okay?
Well.
Okay.
If I'm just saying they're not completely irrational in terms of their, self-preservation instincts. This is what they feel that they need to do. I mean, they're not complete lunatics for following Trump. I mean, in the end, I think it'll prove self-destructive, but I think that's going to take a long time. I do think, sorry to make you scream, but, they worry about primary challenges from the right. They want to forestall those. They have to raise money and, build support in that universe. And so,
but what I'm saying to you, but what I'm
sticking with them.
Yeah, but what I'm saying to you is it isn't working. They don't control. They don't have the most people. They're losing everything.
They are losing everything.
So, but, am I stupid when I'm...
Congressman Smith still gets to keep his seat. Congressman Smith doesn't care that much if the party's going in the shitter. It's as long as Congressman Smith stays in it. So I don't think they're that concerned as long as each of them individually survives. I understand what you're saying.
No, I know you understand what I'm saying and whatever, but I'm just saying, it's a short-term versus long-term.
I agree. I agree. But,
now that's on the political side of it, but let's talk a different side of it, which is democracy. Remember that?
I forgot. Remind me.
I mean, because that seems to no longer care. They're willing to do anything that even in the short run, destroys everything that this country has stood for. And I just don't think there's enough real fight back about this. And I'm wondering what you think. It's brought up a lot, yada, yada, yada. But I don't think people really understand just how much this really does shake up the foundation of this country. Am I seeing something that nobody else is seeing, or?
No, I don't think you're seeing something nobody else is seeing. I think, we got to define our terms of what it is. Is it these state laws rolling back voting? Is it the insurrection?
It's all of the above.
Right.
There and let me add reality, of which there is none from that side. Okay, I'll be quiet. Have at it.
Right. Well, we have one variation of this conversation a lot. We had it during impeachment. These sort of, why aren't the Democrats doing more? And I guess it's a fair point. They're pushing back on the voting stuff. They should get a commission going. They started some hearings yesterday, and by the way, we saw what that led to, right? Lots of Republicans lying, saying January 6th, though, it was just a few tourists who, pushed on an open door and give themselves a self-guided tour of the Capitol.
God, by the way, and CNN is running, by the way, on the left side of the screen, what that white-haired guy says, and on the right-hand side of the screen, exactly what he said on, the day after January 6th. I mean, that's what's so crazy. I mean, the proof is in the pudding as to, how this is just turned on its heel. But it's interesting to me that even though that is there, and that reality is, live on Memorex, if you will, even in truth, even in hard truth is lost.
I agree. Truth is a precious commodity, and it's easily shattered. And Tucker Carlson going on all the time about downplaying what happened on January 6th. And now these congressmen doing it too, and others. It's unbelievable, since we all know what happened on January 6th, and we know what a violent attack it was. It's unbelievable, and that is, to me, that's the most frightening thing going on, because that suggests to me that these congressmen are sort of really following what they think is to their benefit. They think a lot of people in their districts don't think anything happened on January 6th that was objectionable. And if that's the case, that's really scary.
Well, apparently they think that that's the case, or they wouldn't be they wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
No, I agree.
I agree. It couldn't be more bizarre. They had new footage came out on what happened January 6th with this one police officer who was which was just, oh God, I mean, I just got sick.
Blue Lives Matter.
Yeah, right.
They're very concerned about the police.
And again, here we are with hard, cold. These were just not tourists.
I got one.
Jesus, I mean, right? I got one, by the way. That's really pretty darn crazy. And so even with all of that, nothing. But they had the hearing. The Democrats seem to have made a calculated decision that they're going to not make this front and center of everything, because they want to, move Biden's agenda forward. And before we get into Biden's agenda, though, I want to bring up a couple of things. One is Kevin McCarthy, who, boy, I don't get him at all. At all. What could Trump have on him?
I I don't think he's the brightest bulb in the chandelier.
No, I don't either. I agree with you on that. Totally.
I mean, after all this, groveling to Trump, he comes out and says, yeah, I don't see any problem with the election. I think the election was fine.
You know what it is? It's like, I think his theory is throw everything up against the wall. I'll speak to this contingency and I'll speak to that contingency. Which is very Trumpian, by the way. Trump does that too. I mean, Trump does that thing where, they're coming at him, and he plays every angle that he could possibly play, so that none of them get noise. So maybe Kevin's turning into a little, Trump.
Without
the savvy,
without the skills.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there is that. Speaking of Republican crazy, Matt, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
There's plenty of it.
You think?
Oh, my God. There's plenty of that. Oh, yeah, this one. Yeah.
Tell us about this, because this is pretty wild.
Well, the Georgia Congresswoman, the freshman, who's already lost all her committee assignments because she's such a whack job, was, I guess, sort of accosting AOC and kind of following her down the hall, and AOC complained to leadership that this woman's fakaked.
It's nuts.
And I guess and she'd already done this with another Democratic member of Congress, Cori Bush from Missouri, and so I think look, this woman has raised a lot of money since she lost all her committee assignments, and thus much of her clout in Congress. But it's only given her more clout because she's raising a ton of money. The right wing loves her provocations, and and she's a nut job.
The thing about it is, this really was over the top. I mean, from what I read, Ocasio-Cortez bolted. She felt physically threatened by this lunatic, and I wonder at what point is she allowed to just be there? I mean, does Pelosi have no control over whether or not this woman is either brought up to some is dismissed for endangering, if you will, the life of a fellow member of Congress? I think it's gotten to critical. I think she's that crazy, and going on tour with Matt Gaetz. Help me, please.
Right. Well,
please.
No crime going on tour.
No. I understand that. It
might be masochism, but it's not a crime.
It's bizarre. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Look, she's seriously, Jewish lasers, right? I mean, she's.
Yeah. No. She's a whack job.
She's seriously unhinged. I don't know what the next steps would be. The ethics committee, I don't know. Expelling her from Congress, tough.
There is no dignity left in Congress. None. There isn't.
It's, I must say, it's really, all those, terrible formalities of, may the gentleman, yield the balance of their time and all that stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All those Robert's rules, they did at least, enforce some level of decorum. But when you have a whack job,
listen,
it falls apart.
I think this is interesting. It's the House of Representatives. They represent the country. This is who the country is. Yeah. This is who the country is. And how we get civility back into this, or dignity, or respect, or, you could go down the line. It starts at home.
Yeah.
It doesn't start in Congress. And
it took a long time for people in Steve King's Iowa district to, turn on him, and, for him to lose a Republican primary to a more normal challenger. And
that was shamed. They had to be shamed into getting rid of him.
Right. We'll see if this can.
But this isn't just her.
It doesn't look that way.
But this isn't just her, Matt. The point that I'm making is this is Congress, and these are the people, and all of these people who voted to oust Cheney, and who lie in front of and talk out of both sides of their mouths and carry on. This is representative of the kind of people Americans have become all across this nation. That's not cynical. That's fact. I see it here. There's a whole generation, this new generation, that maybe it's because they were brought up as latchkey kids. I don't know. But it's America, and that is very sad. We move on. I just want to give a shout out to Adam Kinzinger, and I think he's a weak advocate. I mean, he just doesn't do it well. I mean, he's getting, people are applauding him for speaking up and all that kind of jazz, but boy, they surely need somebody else who could pull it off better maybe than he does. But that's, unless you don't have anything to say, let me move to John Manchin. Got anything to say about Kinzinger? Sure. Okay. Well,
no.
All right. Manchin declared today he's not going to support the critical voting legislation for the People's Act. And I know he was in the White House the other day. I don't know. What's he for that's democratic? Is there anything he's...
Well, a lot. The reason, Biden got that huge multi-trillion-dollar package passed.
Well, that was after shaming him, too. Let's use that word, shame, a lot. That was... But he since then, everything he speaks to, Matt, is no, and no.
Well, it's really, I think most of it's not yet, or not now. So let's see how it plays out on the infrastructure and other things. I don't think he's a Republican. I don't think
he is either. I think he's a politician, an ugly politician, doing what he needs to do to protect himself. You started
by saying what's democratic about him, and I'm saying he's his own Democrat, but he is a Democrat.
Well, yeah, I guess I was using the word democratic at the same time in my head. Maybe I wasn't clear. Okay, yeah, all right, enough. Because he's not going anywhere fast. Let's talk good news on COVID here in this country, because it certainly isn't true anywhere else. Pfizer vaccine has been approved for adolescents, and Randy Weingarten, the president of the second largest teachers union in America, today came out for school reopenings in the fall. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. Look, these vaccines are not just okay. They're really incredible. And,
on the other hand,
yeah.
The Yankees have been infected, even those who've been vaccinated. What's that?
They have their own physiology. I don't.
Oh, you're a baseball player. It's a little scary.
Yeah,
it's a little scary.
Yeah,
it's a little scary.
Yeah,
because it just ran through the place. There's Ron Johnson this morning getting vaccinated is personal choice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk personal choice. And then there's Dr. Fauci and Rand Paul. But then there's Dr. Fauci. I don't know. Is he overexposed?
Well, he's been constantly exposed for a year. I think he enjoys a lot of approval by the public. Obviously, some people think he's, trying to control them by putting chips in their body. But, I think he's overwhelmingly been a force for good. And
I love him. Don't misunderstand me. Yeah,
Rand Paul can try to vilify him, but even most Republicans aren't doing that.
Yeah,
but more are. I mean, Tucker's always going after him, and Rand Paul's an idiot.
Well, thank you. You're so right. Of course, we know that.
But he's also a jerk. He gets in this fight with his neighbor.
There's something wrong with him, too.
He doesn't wear a mask when he has COVID. There's something just sort of mean about him.
He's another one that I don't understand why people vote him in. Which says more about them than it does about him. It's a strange part of being an American these days, that you gotta support the wackos, It's very strange. It's odd. It's very odd. There's this thing about Biden wearing his mask. I really wish people would shut up. It's a good thing because it keeps COVID in the front of the public space every time he appears with his mask, and I think that's a good thing. He's reminding people that's his job,
I agree. I don't know why it makes people so disturbed. That's what's so funny.
Why? Because
this whole idea that like you're supposed to be upset because someone is wearing a mask when you don't think they should wear a mask.
Anything they can bitch about because they've got nothing to bitch about.
I mean, yeah, they're all snowflakes. I mean, Tucker's always complaining. Like, if I see someone with a mask who's outside, it makes me mad.
They got nothing. They got nothing. All right, let's move on. We'll move on to the infrastructure package because I think this is interesting. There was an odd voice who came out yesterday, John Podesta. Did you read about that?
I missed it.
He started reading the riot act to Biden that he's taking too long in the service of bipartisanship and losing the moment to get the infrastructure package moved. That was shocking to me because he's got a little time still to pull this off. But there you go. The left is starting to, be Pac-Man to Mr. President. Bite him at his, ass. Can you just see it?
Well, I like your Pac-Man. That's very impressive.
Thank you very much. But who knew, right? The talents this girl has. No, jeez. Okay, whatever. I think he's got time, don't you? And I think it's a smart move to bring them all into the White House. McConnell's going to be there today. Is it today or was it yesterday? How many days ago into
I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
The leadership over there.
Right.
Yeah.
Let them talk to them. Let them give them their moment and then just say,
I don't think Nancy's
you.
going to vote for it unless they let this play out more. So I don't think he has the 50 votes to do it. They have to let this play out a little bit.
Do you think you can get Manchin and Manchin was very clear on this. I thought the one thing that he did after being not so clear, it appeared to me that what he was basically saying is give them their shot. If they don't, if they don't step up to the plate,
right.
That's another conversation. I don't know if cinema's the same, but on this one, yeah.
He's not there yet, I think. But look, for Podesta's purposes, it's put some heat on Biden. It's not the worst thing.
Yeah, it just seems...
In turn, it puts it on Manchin, so,
Yeah.
It's okay.
All right. Okay, that's a point. I'll take that. All right, let's move to Israel-Palestinian conflict. Here's a question that I want to ask you, because we can't... Listen, this is just what else is new, in a way. Except for this, Matt. These escalations tend to happen when Democrats are in power. Why is that? Have you thought about that?
This is Obama and Biden's fault.
I think the signaling...
I seem to recall Hezbollah, the war with Hezbollah was under Bush, but okay.
I'm talking about in the last president was Trump. There was no escalation at all under Trump. It was quiet as a mouse for 4 years. I'm just saying that I think there's some messaging that is coming from a Democratic State Department official or the progressive movement in the Democratic Party, which is so anti-Israel at this point, that it gives them some sort of license to do what they don't do when the Republicans basically are in power. That's all I'm saying. And I'm particularly speaking about the Gaza Hamas, not so much Hezbollah. So, in the midst of what is going on there right now, of course, there's Bibi, and the other team has the right now to see if they can form a government. And it actually looks like they might pull it off. I don't know. It's very confusing. But that's also, with Israel being so chaotic in its own politics right now. But there is this, it does work. Things are working when America stays out of it and doesn't start issuing its little left-wing, like Peter, what's his name, Beinart? Do you know him? Beinart?
Yeah.
He was quiet for the last 4 years. Suddenly he's publishing again, stupid Israelis. Okay. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. But we got a one-state solution that's in play right now. And it's interesting. What were you going to say?
Halli, I don't, you don't
agree.
If the sun comes up, it's not because the rooster crowed. This is, I don't believe this is happening as Biden's president. Look, I think you had a lot of, as you know, and I'm just telling you things you know, a lot of things happened to bring us to this moment. The tensions between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, the events in East Jerusalem, the Israeli elections, lots of things are coinciding to make this moment. But I think there's a larger point here. This idea that a lot of people have promulgated that, things were okay. Israel was a startup nation. Everything was calm. The Palestinians weren't rioting. They were sort of becoming resigned to their fate, being occupied. The Abraham Accords, everything was great, Well, not really. This is an existential problem. This is not a small problem. I think it is... I don't think this idea that you can mow the lawn, as the Israelis say, just periodically, get the Gazans back into their area. I don't know. I think they're in real trouble.
Who's in real trouble? Who? I think
Israel.
Okay.
I think Israel's in real trouble. I think this is a serious threat, and I think this is what the two-state people have always been saying. Now, two-state is completely implausible, but the only thing that's worse is one state, because I just think that is not going to last forever. So I think it's quite serious, and the rioting among Arab Israeli citizens is very upsetting too. So I find it a very, very worrying moment, not just like it will pass.
I don't agree with you there. Obviously, you know where I am on all of this, but I will say this. The Palestinian Authority is no authority, and that's an issue. And it's always been an issue. They get funds, they squander the funds, they don't really help their people. That's a problem. No question about it. So that needs to be cleaned up. And I don't know if that's going to, I've always said that, I think a one-state solution can work for a while, but on the other hand, I have an issue with, I think we've already got a two-state solution because Gaza was another state, and I think the Jordanians, who are having their own problems right now, got a lot of land there. That would probably, just be great too. But we're not going to solve this one today in a short show. But peace. Please, guys, can't you just like each other? I'm going to move on real quick, okay?
Okay.
You're good? You're good.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. Economy's looking, layoffs are slowing. Jobs report was a little better today. Gas prices are jumping. That's another thing that happens under Democrats. I don't know why. Inflation is incredibly high. Okay, we've discussed that. We'll move on. Did you know that Biden is resuming work on the border? Announced this morning?
What happened? I'm sorry.
Biden is resuming work on the border wall.
Work on the border? You mean the wall?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean work on the border?
The levies on the he'd stopped everything, and he's throwing money back at the levies and stuff, obviously because so many people are getting across.
Okay.
So I thought that was an interesting story.
Interesting.
We've got nothing on Giuliani or Gaetz. Here's an interesting piece. I just had to run this by you, tell you about this. Did you know that in the state of Florida, should Trump be indicted, that the governor can ask for a review and he can actually stop the extradition, which explains more about Mussolini than I understood.
Interesting.
But I thought the fact that Trump is moving to New Jersey for the summer, which I don't believe has the same extradition problems that for him that or for the feds that Florida does, signals to me maybe he's been told he's okay for a little while. I mean, right?
Yeah, I think they're not going to. Yeah, I think he probably has some heads up.
Yeah, which makes me crazy. Don McGahn is finally going to testify, but behind closed doors on Trump's obstruction of justice. But that tells me he's gonna say Trump obstructed justice. I mean, oh my God.
I think so. I mean, that's more or less in the Mueller report.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to change a lot of things. California, I don't think is going to recall Gavin Newsom. I think that's interesting.
I think you're right.
And let's see. Trump today was speaking.
Run, Caitlin, run.
I think she's the reason that they're not going to overturn Newsom. If you have a choice, which one you picking? Trump speaking to comparisons of Biden to Jimmy Carter, which I don't see, by the way. I don't get that one at all. Said Biden is worse than Jimmy Carter. He's a comedy routine, this guy.
He's living in the past. People don't hate Jimmy Carter.
I mean, he's just he doesn't know politics.
He hasn't been president for 41 years.
Oh, my God. It's unbelievable. 124 retired generals and admirals are questioning Biden's election and his mental health. Did you see that piece? I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that was great.
Who are these people and where do they come from?
Yeah.
And so we end on this, sir. Ready?
I'm ready. Go for it, Halli.
File under It Could Be True. Bennifer 2.0, the dynamic duo J-Lo and Ben Affleck. After Jenny gave up her roving eye and baseball player. The two were taking vacations together. She's a thing for bad boys, I gotta tell you.
I guess so.
Right?
I guess so.
All that talent and all that money and all that beauty, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, if there's a bad boy out there, she's, oh yeah, baby. God.
The heart wants what the heart wants.
Oh, how profound.
Who's to say?
Good. But
how do you give up Jennifer Garner too, right?
Really, absolutely. I'm with you on that one. She's a stunning, smart, interesting woman.
Yeah, how do you,
Well,
come on.
You drink too much.
Well,
There's the answer to that. Ellen DeGeneres is giving up her 16-year-old talk show. So I guess we leave on this. Will we survive without Ellen and without Trump?
I don't know. I think you'd be a good successor. I'd hate to see you go, but you'd be good.
Of the legions of stories of World War II and the Holocaust that shape our understanding of those history-changing events, one of the most extraordinary has remained hidden until now. The daring resistance efforts of Jewish women in the Polish ghettos of the Nazi occupation. In the light of days, the untold story of women's resistance fighters in Hitler's ghettos, author Judy Batalion shares the acts of defiance and rebellion of the unsung women who risked their lives in their David and Goliath fight against the Nazis for justice and liberty, shedding light on the invaluable role these heroines played in fighting against and surviving Hitler's final solution. But how did Batalion first learn of the ghetto girls and their achievements? Her story begins more than a decade ago. Let's let her tell it. Let's talk with Judy Batalion. Judy, so nice to have you here, my Yiddish-speaking friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So startling. Nearly 76 years since the end of World War II and the Allies' defeat of the Nazis. And here you come up with something that really is pretty much an untold story, right? But I want to start here because in some ways you're a part of this story. Tell us about your family, your Jewish heritage, and how that led to the discovery of the women resistant fighters that you write about in this book.
Sure, I will happily tell you that. This can be a 20-hour answer, but let me condense. I am, all four of my grandparents were born and raised in and even married in Poland. My father's parents went to Canada in the 1930s. My mother's parents were Holocaust survivors. They escaped occupied Warsaw. They made it east through, running and hiding in convents and fruit truck, and my grandfather was shot. He survived. His brother was killed. But they made it to the Russian border and were put in work camps in Siberia. And that's how they survived the war. My mother was born on the way back in 1945. They went back to Poland for a while. And they eventually moved to Canada as well. And I'm a Montreal Jew. I grew up in a tight-knit Jewish community in Montreal where I spoke Yiddish.
Amazing.
I spoke it with my grandparents, and I learned it at school.
It's funny because I'm Jewish. I told you before we started, and Yiddish was definitely the only time I heard it in my family was when they didn't want us to understand what they were saying.
Yes, it's been very useful language.
So it really is something. So how did you get to this? I mean, this discovery, right. Fascinating.
Yeah. That was the other part of the question I forgot about. So this book happened completely by accident. This was a serendipitous discovery. It started 14 years ago. I was living in London at the time, and actually, it was the first time in my life I was thinking a lot about my Jewish identity. I was interested in what I call the emotional legacy of the Holocaust, the way that I felt trauma had passed over generations. And in my own life, I was very interested in danger and really how I felt that my Holocaust heritage was shaping how I perceived and reacted to danger in my life. And I decided to write a performance piece about this. But I will condense the story for you a bit because I know we have a lot to talk about. This led me to the British Library where I was doing some research, and I happened to come across a book, an unusual book. Blue fabric cover, gold writing, an old book that was in Yiddish. It was called Women in the Ghettos, Heroine in the Ghettos. But as we said, even more unusual, I happen to speak Yiddish. So I just started flipping through this object, and it intrigued me as an object, really. And I was stunned by what I found. This was a book, a 200-page book, listing dozens of young Jewish women who fought the Nazis from the ghettos and from outside the ghettos, with photographs and bios and bits of obituaries and bits of testimony. It was so unlike any Holocaust narrative I'd grown up with or that I knew. And so that's where it all began.
Yeah, see, to me, this is serendipity, but more than that, really, when you think about it. So much has been written about the underground movement, so many films made, but mostly tales of men. And even of non-Jewish women. Stories have been told. I'm thinking of Sophie Scholl for one. So what you uncover is really quite spectacular, kiddo, I gotta say. The hunting down Nazis and using them to save their own. I tell you what, I haven't slept right since I started reading the book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's interesting because I share that thing with you about how that Holocaust stays with us because we grew up in a time right after the war, and how it affected us and how it affects the whole dynamic. I want to bring that into this conversation because I think non-Jews maybe don't get it. You put it together for them, for something for them to hang on to. It's incomprehensible, as I said, that so little has been written about this. There are a multitude of reasons why. And you talk about them. Tell us some of the reasons why you think these stories were even silenced.
Yeah, so this was almost the sub-question to all my research. On the one hand, I was trying to figure out what happened. What is the story? What is the role of, what were all these Jewish women doing in the resistance? What is the story? And on the other hand, what happened to this story? Why did I not know this? And I came up with many reasons, which I do discuss it towards the end of my book. But briefly, some of these reasons, have to do with women being left out of history books and just, their work not being considered heroic, themselves writing themselves out of chronicles and accounts. Some of it is political, and it has to do with how politics shaped the Holocaust narrative, I think in particular in Israel and Poland as well. Some of it is zeitgeist, and I think at different times we've been interested in different elements of the Holocaust, and we've also found other elements uncomfortable to talk about. So, for instance, in the 40s, people talked more about resistance. In the 60s, people were more interested in Auschwitz, in the concentration camps. In the 70s, you sort of have this bohemian shift, and people are much more, they actually don't want to talk about violent resistance. They talk more about resilience, and spiritual resistance. And so there are different phases in that sense. But I think as well, a large part of this has to do with the personal level. Many of these women didn't tell their story. They didn't tell their story for a long time. Sometimes it's because they felt they weren't believed. They were accused of sleeping their way to safety. They were accused of being a collaborator. Sometimes they suffered from really very, very pungent survivor's guilt. They felt that they, compared to their fellow survivors who'd been through Auschwitz, they hadn't had it that bad. They almost felt they didn't merit telling their story. And sometimes I think it was pure coping. Many of the women I write about in the resistance, they're very young. When the war was over, they were 22 years old. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They had nothing, no family, no nationality. They were refugees in countries where they didn't speak the language. They had to completely start over. And I think for many of them, especially those who felt a great duty to have children, to repopulate the Jewish people, it was very important to start fresh, to put their pasts away in order to move on and have families and raise children. And for all these reasons, yeah.
No, I hear you. I wanted to bring this in because I think this is a part of the story that will be what most people treat the least, because the stories of what they did are so exciting. So I wanted to make sure we got that in there. And I wanted to also say that it changed you talk about this. It changed the narrative of the war, of the European Jewish fight against the Nazis. I mean, so often the story I heard when I was a kid is how complacent and compliant and weak and victim that they were, like little sheep, just will go to slaughter because that's what we have, no choice. And that's not the whole story, or even close.
I mean, after doing this work, I can't even see this as a story to me now it's a story of constant resilience, constant struggle, constant defiance. I mean, just most people were killed because they were up against a brutal military force. But that doesn't mean they weren't constantly finding ways to resist.
And I think that's important. You did massive amounts of research. Talk to us about some of the discoveries you made that you uncovered on a daily basis. I mean, your jaw must have been, you need a new jaw?
I need a new jaw. I need some knees too, and a hip if you have. I mean, I did so much research. The primary material here, I was working with memoirs and testimonies. And I tried to find as many as I could. I found the original Yiddish book had names of several dozen women, and I tried to find whatever testimonies, memoirs I could find of theirs in any of these Jewish libraries, Holocaust archives, testimony banks. And then each testimony would mention 20 other women, and then each one would mention 20 other women. So it really mushroomed, and I tried to read as many as I could. I wanted to develop as sort of full a picture of this story as I could, hearing it from different perspectives, which often had, they conflicted in their detail or in certain dates or times, but mostly it was amazing that the same stories were being told over and over again from different perspectives. So it really helped me build a fuller picture. I also used photographs. I found amazing photographs. There are some in the book as well. And other objects and artifacts. Oh my gosh,
I'm just staring at those pictures, trying to understand who these women are and where they got the guts and the courage and everything that they found within themselves to do the things that they did. The bravery, extraordinary. Another point to be made, Jewish women could get away with things Jewish men couldn't.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
So Jewish women, to do a lot of this resistance work, you have to leave the ghettos. Jews were imprisoned in ghettos across Poland. There were over 400 ghettos. If a Jew left the ghetto, they were killed. So to do a lot of resistance work, you had to leave the ghetto. You had to get supplies. You had to get weapons. You had to connect with other people. And it was easier for women to do this. And part of that is it was easier for women to pass as being Christian. And there are reasons for this. For one, Jewish women were not circumcised. men have a physical marker of their Jewishness on their body. If a man on the outside the ghetto, was suspect of being Jewish, at one point they'd be told to drop their pants. Women didn't have this threat. Moreover, women in the 1930s in Poland, education was mandatory for boys and girls, but Jewish families, they often sent their sons to Jewish schools, and they sent their daughters to Polish public school. This was to save on tuition. But actually, their education in these Polish public schools meant that these women were more acculturated. They were more assimilated. Jewish women, they knew Christian habit. They knew prayers. They had many Christian friends. They knew their mannerisms. And importantly, they learned how to speak. They always talk about this, Polish like a Pole, without the creaky Yiddish accent. And so they were better able to blend in, to be on the outside. And of course, as women, they I think still now we're often, as women, trained to respond to others' cues, to think about what others are thinking, what others are seeing, to be coy, to be flirtatious. And all of that were skills that made them the perfect undercover spies.
Give us a glimpse into the kind of work they did, the depth of the danger they exposed themselves to. They were called courier girls. Talk to me about that.
So I try to talk about, in my book, a range of resistance activities that women engaged in, from, on the one hand, setting up soup kitchens and running secret schools for children, all the way to shooting Nazis, assassins, and guerrilla fighters in ghetto uprisings. But I spent quite a bit of time talking about this role of courier girls, because that's what many women did in the organized youth resistance. And these were women who, as I said, they dressed up as non-Jews. They wore the right clothes. They had to buy or borrow handbags and clothes, and they dyed their hair if needed. They did what they could to look and appear as Christian as possible, and they would slip in and out of ghettos. And they were, at first, they were really delivering information. Jews in ghettos were not allowed to have radios or newspapers. It was young Jewish women that were often bringing them the news of what the Nazis were doing. It ended up being Jewish women bringing the news of the Nazi genocide. They also brought supplies, they brought fake IDs, they brought money. And then when the underground militias started when the underground groups became more militarized, it was Jewish women that were often arming them. They were the ones leaving the ghettos, going to meet weapons dealers, strapping guns to their torsos, putting explosives in their handbags, and bringing them back into ghettos to help arm them for uprisings. Women also did rescue work. So they helped to take Jews out of ghettos and slave labor camps and find them hiding spots.
Talk to me about Rania K. Is that how you pronounce her name? Or
yes.
Did I do good? I did all right.
You did good.
Good. Let's bring her to life a little bit, because I think if we speak in the overall, you don't really get just how intense and how brilliant and how wonderful these women and courageous these women were. You got attached to her.
I did. I got attached to her right away. She was in that original Yiddish book that I found, and her writing was so narrative. It was dramatic. It was detailed. Her story was so full of movement and life, and wit even. I was immediately drawn to her. She was 15 when the war started. She was always defiant. Her family was ghettoized, of course, and she would sneak out to trade family heirlooms for bits of food. When the family realized they were all going to be killed, she fled from the ghetto by herself. She ran through fields. She pretended to be Christian. She looked good, as they used to say. She was lighter toned, so she could pass. She was once on a train. She was recognized. She just picked up her bag, got up, walked down to the end of the train, a little platform outside, and just jumped right off. She got a job working for a half German family as a housekeeper. Eventually, she landed with the Jewish underground cell in the town of Bejin in southwest Poland. And she became one of these courier girls that we were talking about. They needed someone to run missions to Warsaw. They needed information. Warsaw was sort of the headquarters, and all the other couriers had been killed. And they needed someone to go, someone who looked good. So they asked her if she'd go. She said, "Of course I'll go." So Renia began doing these missions, going back and forth between Bajin and Warsaw, gathering information, money in her garter belt, fake, she'd walk around, she'd go to Warsaw, buy fake IDs, 20, huge amounts of them, like hide them on her person. She helped arrange buses to transport Jews out of ghetto. She helped bring people out of the ghetto and find them safe spots in Warsaw. And she also smuggled weapons. She met weapons dealers in the cemetery in Warsaw, would buy guns from him. She was the one to strap them, tape them to her torso, explosives in her bag, and would just get back on the train and bring it all back to the ghetto.
As I said, you did a lot of research on this, but you did find inconsistencies in the stories, and I think it's fascinating. I just did a book about a woman who became a spy during the war, a model in New York, was recruited, and her story changed over the years. She wrote the first biography of what happened, or autobiography of what happened, and then it changed as the years went on a little bit, and there were multiple reasons why. And the author was able to mete out the truth. What about you with these inconsistencies and stories that you came up with?
Sure. I mean, I was writing a history out of personal stories, out of memoirs and testimonies and family stories. And a few times I was using reminiscences written by friends, but these are not cold data. And so there were inconsistencies. And the way I handled it was, as I said, I tried to read as many accounts of the same event as I could find. I tried to find what did overlap. And also there was some element of my own judgment, what made sense. If on one page something was in November, on the next page it happened to be December, it didn't make sense it was December. It had to be November. I had to, I made my own call that must have been an error. Actually my book has 65 pages. It depends on the edition of endnotes. And a lot of that is me explaining why I chose to go with the version I did, and that there are other versions of the story out there. But the discrepancies are always in detail. Like they're always, they're overall the same story is told. Just sometimes certain things are emphasized, or there's, what the exact date might be remembered differently. But I tried to find what I felt was the most, and of course I read whatever historical information I could around it too, to see if it fit with other accounts. But I tried to create as truthful a telling as I could.
Right. I understand that. I'm not in any way disparaging it. I'm making the point that history is interesting, 76 years later. And they had different reasons for telling the kind of stories that they told or they didn't tell, or that they kept secret themselves. Yeah. What becomes a resistor? I want to talk to you about that. They had choices, these women. They could stay, they could leave, they could return, they could be so committed they wind up dead. But there comes a time when the resistors actually burn through their own resources, I think, is how you put it, physically and emotionally. So what happens then? What happens after they've witnessed some of the brutality that they've witnessed, put themselves out where, their DNA is changed from the fear that they have to live with in order to do what they have to do and move forward with their courage. What happened to those who survived? What happened to their lives after the war? How do you see this in terms of their children? They say Holocaust survivors are survivors of the camps. Their children and their grandchildren experience, a lot of the emotional repercussions. It just didn't end the day they were released from Auschwitz.
Okay, that's like a 20-part.
I know. Leave it to me. I told you this was a tough one for me. Putting this piece together. A lot to get to.
The last part, so as your listeners should know, the last part of the book takes place entirely after the war. I was very interested, for those women that did survive, in understanding what happened to them. How did they keep on surviving? How did they experience what they'd experienced, given up everything to fight the Nazis, lost everything, refugees in new countries? How did they go on? And it's different for different women. There are different stories. every character is a little bit different. And I think overall, some of the women remained quite traumatized by the stories, by what they'd been through. They never shook it. And a really tragic example of one woman who survived all this and then killed herself because the traumatic memories were too unbearable. And other women managed ways through their careers and families to cope and live. And other women really, as I said earlier, didn't tell the story at all. They either wrote or talked about their story at the beginning, and then that was part of the therapy, and then they kind of put it aside and really tried to start fresh and move on. Is that answering like questions 1 to 6 of your?
Yeah, no, I think it's important to say yeah, absolutely answered. Of course you did. I think in the overall picture, I don't want to paint a picture, and I'm sure you didn't mean to, and you didn't in the book, of this, they're heroines, and, oh my gosh, there was horror to this. And it didn't end the day that, in 1945. They went on to live lives and have to deal with the emotional and all the other aspects of what they'd been through.
For several of them, they write about liberation as being the worst day of their lives, which is exactly not what we would imagine. We would imagine liberation from the Nazis being their champagne in the streets affair. And instead, for many of these women, being part of the underground, being part of the resistance or the partisans, this had given them purpose. Mm-hmm. It had given them community and camaraderie. They had this was a world of passion and fury and again, purpose. And they were able to mute some of their feelings of grief and loss and horror by staying so busy, by being part of this constant performance, by risking their lives. This work took their mind off things, and to be tongue in cheek. And once they no longer had that, when the Russian tanks rolled in 44, 45, they no longer had a purpose, and they had lost these years in their lives. They lost their whole families, friends, and the world that they knew didn't exist anymore. They were so disoriented. So that for many of them, the way they dealt with it was by giving. They immediately started setting up organizations to help other surviving Jews. Many of them did that.
I think there's something interesting here, and you talk about feminism, and that these women were feminists. Feminism didn't start in the 60s or to say, but they were allowed to be people and not women. And they were allowed to live like men were allowed to live in that day, different times than you and I were raised in, and cast aside the female. They were just people who could do something, which out of the war would not have been the case. You know what I'm saying? They couldn't have done that. They couldn't have led those kind of lives, I think, other than the war giving them that opportunity. So I think there's that. I don't know if you agree with me or you don't, but that was what I thought. Did you think during this, and this is as we get to the close, did you, if you could do what they did, or what you would have done in that circumstance as a Jewish woman?
I think that question was with me at every sentence. I think that's really what propels my interest in my obsession with these figures. It just felt to me like I could never do this. Who were they? How could they do this? How could they do this? I thought about it all the time, and I don't think I could have done it.
Interesting. Judy, this is something. Thank you for bringing to light this extraordinary accomplishment of the brave Jewish women who helped weaponize Poland's Jewish youth groups to resist the Nazis in this must-read book, folks. The Light of Days, the untold story of women resistance fighters in Hitler's ghettos. Judy, leave us with your thoughts on their legacy, not just to history, but to Judaism.
Someone asked me the other day how this has sort of changed my own understanding of the Holocaust in my family. And even though I'm not writing about my family, this has really changed my perspective. I think when I started this, I was interested in trauma and how trauma passes through generations. And now I'm interested in strength and how strength passes through generations. And I feel so proud to be from this legacy of strong Jewish women. And of course, I see the strength in my own family, too. These are, incredible tales of women who had nothing and risked everything to fight for freedom, to fight for their convictions, to fight for justice.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I've been speaking with Judy Batalion. Her book is The Light of Days, the untold story of women's resistance fighters in Hitler's ghettos. For more information, visit her website at judybatalion.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.